Hello everyone, welcome back to my show. Today it's a massive to me anyway, book haul. The last few days we've been out in different places and parcels have arrived. We've had a couple of trips out and books have, of course, come back into the house with me. Mostly representing some of my current enthusiasms and some long time hunting goals for books. Let's see, lower that slightly. Okay, hope you can hear me okay. Socks is outside because it's really warm and sunny on Sunday. I've just come in for a bit to escape the heat. I've been outside reading Brian Jakes. I'm in the last bit of Redwall. As I was saying the other day, I'm rereading the first book in the Redwall series and just really enjoying it. I read it first in 2008 and I think I was lukewarm on it for some reason. I really wanted to like it. I had so many friends who had talked warmly about that series. Anyway, this time around, at the age of 55 and a half, I discover it's just right for me at this point. So I did nip ahead on eBay and buy the next couple in the series just to make sure I've got them for when I need them. So these lovely shiny, brand new, really, copies, unread, that will have been away somewhere in a warehouse or on somebody's shelf untouched for quite a while. This edition is from 1990, I think. It was published first in 89. This was the second one, Mossflower. That cover is so evocative. There's something so mysterious about these books and their covers and the pictures that they evoke. A bit obviously like Wind in the Willows for the obvious reasons, but also that kind of haziness of light through trees and leaves and the creatures underneath that lets you into a world that's kind of half familiar. Very, very British. It's British wildlife mucking about and having battles and adventures and things. But there's something so evocative about that. I suppose because it looks like sunlight on days when you played out as a child, like when I played out down the burn in our town, and it was all trees and miles of countryside to muck about in. It does take me back to that, really. So figuring out the chronology and how to read these, some people subscribe to the school of thought that you should read them in the chronological order of the series, which mucks up the order of publication. You can reorder them. Or there's the order of publication, which I would prefer. It's the order in which he made them up, and the chronology might loop around and you might go back. But I think there's something to be said for reading the things in the way that the author set out on them, and also the way the original audience came across them. So I think Mossflower's next, followed by Matimio, the third one. So that one's a flashback one, I think, and this one is back a sequel to the first one. And then I've got another one on the way, and then this is a little way after that, Martin the Warrior. But I'm so enjoying them. So enjoying the one I'm on with. It's sending my mind off in all sorts of directions about animal books and maybe rereading Watership Down and digging out the tales from Watership Down, which I never read, and a few other things as well. Mrs. Frisbee and the Rats of Nim by Robert O'Brien, I think, which I read first when I was 8 years old, I think. All of these books in which ferocious animals scrabble for life are very kind of dear to me, I suppose. That's what it is. And of course, as I've said before, animal books were always a way to read about adult lives and adult complications and adult difficulties for a child readership. That's how you understood them as a kid. It was a way of adults making their own world palatable. It was a way of reading about complicated adult lives, but in animal form. Animal form, like Animal Farm. Okay, what else? We went to, well, first of all, I stopped by the local big charity shop around the corner on the way to get something or other. And that's where the books are 4 for £2. And I ended up with 2 of the most recent Jill Mansell novels in hardback. Jill writes romantic comedy, usually set in Cornwall. This is Promise Me and Should I Tell You? Both of them from the last couple of years. I first met Jill when we were both, she's still published by Headline. They dumped me years ago. When I was first taken on by Headline in the very beginning of 2006. And they had me go and do some events like dinners with booksellers and stuff like that. And I met other Headline authors. And I was lucky enough to be sent to do things with Jill Mansell and with Carol Matthews, who writes similarly hilarious romantic comedies in the present day. And both became friends, and I'm still in touch with both and still read both. Although I think Carol's having a bit of a break from writing. I hope it's just a break. And Jill's still there doing her annual books, and I'm a bit behind with Jill. So that's a lucky find to get those in hardback. And I got, because it's 4 for £2, I had to make up the 4. Another Sue Moorcroft. I read that one about Italy last month, One Summer in Italy, and quite liked it. I quite liked the atmosphere she evoked. So I thought I'd give her another go at some point, and A White Christmas on Winter Street. These titles are kind of generated by computer program, I think. They have to have certain elements in. Anyway, and then a real find. I didn't know this existed. I don't remember seeing this even when the film was out. When Grease Fever was at its height in 1978, we all went to the pictures. And we went to the Odeon in Darlington, where the screen was as wide as the whole building. And we saw Grease. And there's a novelisation by Ron Cristoforo, based on the screenplay by Bronte Woodward. It's a first person telling. I think it's from the point of view of one of the T-birds. It switches points of view, I think. Anyway, it reads a bit like J.D. Salinger, as of course it should, given the time. It's like 58, 59, 60. So it should read a bit like Catcher in the Rye. It begins like this. Now, to tell you the truth, the thing you got to realise before you set out to read a story about the 50s is that nothing ever happened. So there really is nothing to tell. Absolutely nothing of any importance. Sure, some history books will say that some history was made here and there in the 50s. Magazines will show you new appliances, a new war, fancy contraptions, clothing, inspirational hobbies, and a lot of other crap that kept people distracted. But this is a story about people who didn't want to be distracted, at least not by anything or anyone other than themselves. We had each other and our music, and that was everything. Yeah, the music. Man, it kept us alive. It told our stories, our dreams, and our heartaches. Our music understood us. Elvis, Chuck, Jerry Lee, Buddy, the Drifters, the Coasters, the Moonglows, they cared. All you had to do was slip a coin into the slot and you found somebody who knew what it was really all about. Now, if that's not deliberately setting out to somehow echo J.D. Salinger's Holden Caulfield in The Catcher in the Rye with his talk of, I'm not going to do that David Copperfield crap at the beginning of my book, I think it really does set out to do that, and we'll see. I was delighted to find it, though. I love novelizations. I'm sure I've said that before. They're a subgenre that doesn't get enough attention. Right, and then we went to... yesterday we had a trip out because the weather was glorious, and we headed south to Bakewell and Buxton, these lovely towns in Derbyshire. And they all have bookshops and charity shops tucked away. And the hunting for books wasn't ideal. It wasn't brilliant, but I did come away with a couple of things that deserve description. Weirdly, one was this bizarre coincidence where I was thinking about the poet E.E. Cummings for some reason, and I thought I'll just have a look to see what's available at the moment, because I've never had a volume, a kind of greatest hits, a selected poems of E.E. Cummings, and they're all quite expensive, and a couple of ones are in print, and I settled on one edited by Richard S. Kennedy that includes illustrations and all sorts of bits and pieces. And I thought, oh, it's quite dear still, so I thought I'll just think about it, put it in my Amazon wish list or whatever, just so I'd remember. And then the first shop, we went into the Mind charity shop in Bakewell, the town famous for its puddings and its tarts, and frangipani tarts with jam. The first shop we go into, there it is. Amongst all the kind of ordinary, boring kind of charity shop books, the thrillers and the usual tat, there's E. Cummings for £2. The exact edition. Like the exact edition I've been looking at that, an hour earlier. It's so weird. Maybe it's not weird. Maybe I'm just being kind of oversensitive to this stuff, but I thought it was weird. So I've always wanted to explore his weirdly scattered and idiosyncratic and sensual poems. The bits I've read, I've really liked. Some person has been at it with a highlighter, which is annoying. They've highlit in pink. The wrists of twilight would rejoice. Why? I think people do these things just at random. Of course, as an English student, everything was underlined, and we were annotating books all the time. But always with an essay in mind, not this kind of, that sounds profound, so I'll underline it. And what I can't bear is on ebooks, when you have a little passage that says 94 people have underlined this passage as whatever, or 967 people have underlined this passage. I don't care. I don't care what they think is interesting. Anyway, the worst thing was finding this. A bit of paper engineering had gone on. This is barbarism. Somebody has razed out whole stanzas. It's a bit like one of those books where you have the top, the middle and the bottom of different animals and people, and you can kind of mix them up. That'd be quite good for poems, wouldn't it? To mix and match stanzas. I don't think anything so creative was going on. I think somebody just cut out a poem that they either loved or they were offended by, and out it came. What a dreadful, dreadful thing to do to a book. It makes underlining seem okay compared. It's interesting to have drawings of his in there as well. Bit of smudgy charcoal. Okay, that's E. Cummings. And then, a couple of kind of obvious buys. My various copies of James and the Giant Peach are with the older charcoalish drawings from the 60s, which I love, but in recent years they've done these editions with Quentin Blake drawings, and as I've probably said a million times, I just love Quentin Blake, and these editions show off his pictures so nicely, so it might be something I'm gonna be collecting up. Although I'd avoided buying even more copies of Roald Dahl. I really love Roald Dahl's books. I especially love the books from the 60s and the 70s. After that, I think he goes a bit soft, to be honest. I think it happens somewhere around The Witches. And The Witches I kind of like. But when I read the Jeremy Triglawan biography, it becomes clear that his editor has more to do with it and does what Dahl calls super editing, which means, I think, supplying more of the text than an editor normally would. And you get softer edges. You get books like the BFG and Matilda, which are kind of all right, but they're not. They haven't got the scratchy savagery, offhand savagery of something like James and the Giant Peach. So I think James and the Giant Peach, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Champion of the World, Danny the Champion of the World, that's where it's really at for me. It's also, you know, it's my time. It's when I was a kid. By the 80s, I was a teenager and fancying that I'd grown up somehow, which was a state of being which lasted until I was about 27, when I decided I really hadn't at all. And what's more, I didn't have to. Now, this is the Phantom Lobster by Leo Walmsley, in this edition from a small press based in Yorkshire in 1992. This is something I've looked for years and years, and found it for £1 or something yesterday. That's the point. When I have these piles of books that I've collected up, they always cost about £1 or £1.50. Don't worry, I'm not bankrupting myself buying lots of nonsense. Generally, I do not spend a fortune on books. I do spend a fortune on books, but individually it's not a fortune. Cumulatively, yeah. But I'm not one of these people who goes collecting antiquarian stuff. We went to an antiquarian bookshop yesterday, and the poor woman at the counter looked horrified at the people cramming inside her shop looking for, you know, Harry Potters and all that jazz, and fingering her folio editions. Anyway, I don't collect books that are expensive, really, at all. Phantom Lobster. Back to this. When we went to Whitby in the 90s, there was a shop, still is a shop, a greengrocer, a very old-fashioned one, with a B&B above it and a little side passage. And we stayed in the B&B, which was quite eccentric, and became the model in some ways for Brenda's B&B in Never the Bride, when I wrote that in 2005, 20 years ago. And the shop had always been the same, going back to when I was a kid, and we used to go to Robin Hood's Bay on days out. There'd be the little fishing nets outside, you know, the bamboo poles and the plastic mesh, and there'd be the racks of postcards for 10p each of Robin Hood's Bay, different views, and there'd be the sticks of rock and all that stuff, and inside there'd be normal kind of provisions that people on holiday would need, and wooden shelves and, you know, all that stuff. And for some reason in the 90s, they had this pile of novels by somebody called Leo Walmsley with these painted covers from a small press. And I was fascinated by them. They cost £6.50, which seemed steep. It was steep in the early 90s, mid-90s. And I didn't buy it. I didn't buy the Phantom Lobster. And it haunted me, the Phantom Lobster, for years after that, when I wrote the Brenda books, when I was back there. The idea of a novel in which is set in a fictionalized version of Robin Hood's Bay, called, it's about the fisher folk of Bramblewick. And it turns out Leo Walmsley lived there, came from Robin Hood's Bay, and he set his fiction there. But I thought it was about a lobster who tottered around the dark lanes of Victorian Robin Hood's Bay and Victorian Whitby and Scarborough in a cloak, a kind of fanged and malicious lobster who was ghostly, attacking people by night with his pincers. This is obviously the way I think, but it wasn't. It's about fishing and about how somebody invents the perfect lobster pot, which isn't so exciting at all. But I'm really up for descriptions of early 20th century life in a fishing village like Robin Hood's Bay, and the people, and it's such a small place, you know nearly every house from visiting there. I'll be so interested to go back in time and see that. I'm not so interested in fishing, but a bit of descriptive prose about the old place and about the sea wouldn't come amiss. But I will save the story, the imagined story of the Phantom Lobster, for a story of my own. I think that has to happen, a Brenda story. You heard it here first. Is That You, Maureen? By Jeremy Swan, which is a book about behind the scenes kids TV in the 1970s. I'd seen this advertised. It's quite new. Somebody he directed and produced Jackanory, Rent-A-Ghost and Sooty. It's the kind of book I just have to have. And Jeremy was reading bits in the cafe in Bakewell where we went and had a sit down, and he was hooting with laughter at some of the theatrical anecdotes. So I love anything about kids TV of that era when I grew up, because it was the best. Right, in the post, the third of these that I sent off for arrived. I got a bunch of Kate DiCamillo books because I read that lovely Magician's Elephant last week. This is Flora and Ulysses, which I saw the TV movie of and loved it. And this is the book that it's based on. So that's 3 of hers I've got waiting for me in these fancy hardbacks that cost about £3, which is brilliant for me, but I think it's kind of criminal. This leapt off my shelf. It's come my way via my shelves. Oscar and the Ice Pick, Judy Corbalis. And I'm mentioning it now because I intend to reread it, because it's 30 years since I read it for myself. It was spring 1995, and I was in the midst of all sorts of things. I was about to move to Edinburgh. I was finding out that I had no teaching hours next year, 1995-6, at Lancaster, and I'd sold my first novel, and I'd got some work at Granada Studios writing for a soap opera invented by Russell T Davies. So I had this summer of going to Manchester and doing these script meetings, and I was moving all my stuff to Edinburgh and living this life away from any kind of academic base for the first time. And I was going home sometimes and reading to my sister, who at that point was 8 and loving books. And she loved Oscar and the Ice Pick by Judy Corbalis. And many years later, I got my own copy. Oscar and Henrietta, the gorillagram, set off for the Himalayas on what they thought would be a simple, enjoyable task, delivering Oscar's mountaineering mother's ice pick to her. It wasn't simple, and much of the time it was alarming rather than enjoyable, but the telling is hilarious. And I remember it being really good. So then, today, almost up to date, today we've been to a big car boot sale in Burnage, down the road from us. It was gloriously sunny at 9 o'clock this morning on Sunday, so we went and checked out everything. All the stalls, all of the cars, and Jeremy's got a bag full of vinyl. I've got some books. I'll go through them. This is Magic Hats 2, edited by Jack Dan and Gardner Duzois. I don't know, it's Duzois. It's one of those anthologies with people like Asimov, Lillian Jackson Braun, Ursula K. Le Guin, and I noticed, who did I like? Tanith Lee is there, and Fritz Lieber. They're fantasy stories based around cats. It's an ace fantasy, so it's one of those books that would have been in my glorious remainder bookshop, American Remainders in Darlington back in the day. This would have come out in the late 80s, early 90s, I would think, 91. And it's part of a series. I've noticed them on eBay. They're quite dear, but there one was. And then some picture books. Lucky the Guard Dog. This is a Purnell book. This is the reason I got it, from 1971. I seem to have a bunch of Purnell books at that age, the Disney books from that time. This isn't Disney, but it shares the kind of the colour and the sensibility of those kind of books illustrated by, is it Mary Bear or Blair? I think it's Bear. And I just think they're gloriously made kids' books. They look like they're painted in transparent inks, beautiful colours. And when you look at kids' books now, I sound like such an old fart, but look at this. There is a book that haunts me from this time that I saw in bins one Christmas when I was about 1, 2, 3, probably 3 or 4, in South Shields, the day that we went to see Santa in his grotto, which was all silvery paper inside. And I was hooked on this particular book that was all blue and pink inside. And I think it was something like this. So whenever I see these particular era's books, I have to check them out, thinking one day I'll find this particular book again. Look at the colours. Anyway, also, Witches Spell Trouble. It's a petrifying pop-up book, part of a series with Dracula and the Dentist, Party on Spooky Street, and Monsters Don't Eat Pizza. It turns out these are quite sought after and expensive, of course. Look at these. Whoops. I love pop-up books. This isn't a very elaborate pop-up, but the story's funny. It's witty and really nicely illustrated. This is from the 90s. Showing you the whole story now. Now I think it is quite a good pop-up book. I know there's more elaborate ones with things shooting out all over the place. This one is amazing to have, that it's kind of survived. I think it's got one tear in the whole book, which is kind of amazing when you think the kind of jip that they must get. Now, this is the real find of the day. This was £1. It's The Snow Queen. I've got multiple copies of Hans Christian Andersen's The Snow Queen. It's my favourite of his tales. This is retold by Naomi Lewis and illustrated by Errol LeCain, somebody whose work I've looked at online and toyed with, bidding for on eBay. It tends to be quite dear. This is from 1979 and it's ravishing. The artwork is beautiful, and it's beautiful. Kestrel books, beautifully reproduced as well, which isn't always the case. Look at that, it's riffing on Bruegel, I think. It's so nicely done. It's the kind of drawings that you can spend a lot of time staring at and considering and getting lost in. That's the whole point, isn't it? Getting lost in books. And there's something so late 70s about the autumnal feel, the autumnal intricacy of them. I think of that time as being my mum and other women having these kind of long dresses, maybe velvety, with lots of patterning on them. And of course all the music was very intricate as well. It's things like Kate Bush's Never Forever, that kind of aesthetic sums it up pretty well. Look at these. I'm not going to show you every illustration in this, but I did want to show this off. The fella asked for £1.50 and I bargained him down brutally to £1 and felt slightly guilty. All the other books he had were dreadful, terrible things, kind of not worth having. And he didn't look as if he was particularly fond of books or interested. But maybe I'm doing him a disservice. A lot of the time you go around car boot sales and the books are just the most boring of contemporary thrillers or awful biographies of footballers or businessmen. Just the kind of rubbish that people buy by the yard and try and sell by the yard. But you can find things like picture books, illustrated by Errol LeCain. Look at the Northern Lights. Yeah, stunning. So I think that's the find of the week for me. Well, that's my massive book haul, and that's taken half an hour to tell you about. I'm going to stop now, and I will see you again later this week, and I'll let you know what I'm up to and what I'm reading. Let me know below what you're up to and what you're reading, and I hope everybody is well. Goodbye.